listening to The Observing Eye. Pirate radio for the mind. Coming at you fresh from the computer hell cabin.
Hello, you beautiful lot. It's Friday, the 3rd of February, and you're here for another episode of The Observing Eye. Let's have a little check-in, as I want to try and do at the beginning of each podcast every week. Let's take a moment to pause and reflect on how we're doing. How's your week been? What's been going on for you? What's been challenging? What's been exciting? What's been uplifting? I'm hoping that there are more uplifting things than challenging things for you this week. So today I'm going to be talking around something that I've been reading on this week and just sort of noticing has been coming up a lot in the social media and sort of news feeds that I've been paying attention to. And that's around the sort of, and I think I've talked about this before when I've written stuff, but it's around the whole kind of existential crisis that it feels like we're all in at the moment. Now, I finally started reading, as it's been sitting on my shelf. I was going to say shitting on myself, sitting on my shelf. That's an entirely different podcast. For probably about a year, if not longer, which is Ernest Becker's Denial of Death. And it's a read, and I would recommend it to anyone who's interested in sort of existential ideas around meaning. But I was thinking this week that there's a real reframing of meaning in today's culture, today's world. We are really in a zeitgeist of finding purpose. And I think a lot of our angst comes from that sense of purpose, that sense of meaning. If we went back 100 years to Freud, it was all around filial piety and guilt and shame and that kind of thing. But mainly influenced, I feel, because religion was a bigger factor in people's lives back then than it is now. And I'm not even going to start talking around Catholic guilt, because again, that's an entirely separate podcast. And having been taught by nuns as a child, I am very familiar with the idea of Catholic guilt in the 80s. But now we're all about meaning, purpose. The zeitgeist is identity, and how do we fit? Where do we frame ourselves in the world? We are inherently, since our inception, we are storytelling machines. We exist off the back of narratives that we create for ourselves, and these narratives define us. Before the advent of the written word and we were scrawling pictures on caves, we would transmit our history and our culture through stories, through language. This is why mythology is such an important part of our history. We would create stories that would define our culture and our society and our value system. And I wonder now where our value system comes from and what our value system is. What defines who we are these days? Because there are no great pantheon of heroes like we had in the time, the Greeks and the Romans and the Viking Eddas and everything else. They don't exist anymore. We've got reels and we've got stories and we've got TikTok and Snapchat, and this has become our mode of orally transmitting and our narrative. That's how we propagate our values, is through media rather than mythology. And I thought that was really, really interesting idea, that, how the narrative, the medium through which the narrative is transmitted has changed so drastically in such a short space of time. I saw this week, and I've seen this figure thrown around for some time now anyway, but again, serendipity dictates that this thing would appear when I am contemplating this stuff. But the World Health Organization put out some statistics where they have said that more people each year die to suicide than to the combined effects of war and natural disaster. And that is terrifying. That is terrifying. So what is unsettling us so much that we choose to opt out of existence? Where is our meaning? Why do we feel bereft of meaning? You know, what's created this vacuum of purpose? It's a real sort of challenging space. And I wonder if it's where we have created an abstraction between ourselves through the use of technology as the medium through which we transmit our values and our meaning. And by this, you know, we've gone from in, again, a short space of time. Let's say short space of time is a few hundred years. That is a fragment of nothing, really. I know it feels like a lot, but it's 4 generations, 200 years, 4 people, all the cats singing, 4 generations. And that's really not a lot of time at all to transition from a space where we existed, we worked where we lived, we existed in much more with a communal focus. There was much more of a sort of family-centric ideal. And we have transitioned very, very quickly to commuting distances to work, or even now working at vast distances remotely. And we rely upon media and social media, particularly technology, to communicate. And I think it sent us a little bit mad. I think we're all just losing our shit quietly in the background because we are inundated with information and we have such access to information. I used to watch. This is an opinion. This is my feeling. I had to caveat this stuff. So I used to watch, many years ago, I would get up in the morning and I would turn on BBC News, right? And I would just have that on in the background while I pottered around before work, had breakfast, all that kind of stuff. Now, this week, this was Monday, I turned on BBC News because I thought, you know what, I haven't watched this in years. I'm going to put it back on and see what it was like. Within 45 minutes, I had to turn it off, and I was overwhelmed by a visceral sense of ennui and what I can best describe as delirious dissatisfaction and sadness. I think I was going to say depression, but it's not depression. It's just sadness. It was atrocious. It was awful. I don't even know what the purpose of it was, just to evoke these feelings. There was such a sense of just shit going on in the world, and I felt like, personally, the way that story was portrayed, the narrative that was given to me, was skewed in such a way that it generated these feelings. I wasn't impressed, to put it mildly, and I shan't be watching it again. I think that that's a microcosm of the macro. You know, I think that example is an example of many, many situations where media information that we see, the narrative that's contained within that taints our worldview. And because we use narratives to define who we are, to tell our story, to transmit our values and our culture, it's just it's a fucking mess. It really feels like a bit of a mess. But I don't want to get too depressing because, of course, I like to come at these podcasts. We're getting as I get towards the end of the podcast, I like to do my little He-Man moment, which, if any of you are old enough to have seen the 80s cartoon, right at the end, He-Man would turn to the camera, break the fourth wall, and tell children not to put their fingers in sockets or stick knives in toasters. So this is my little moment of that. How do we battle the narrative that exists around us and is causing us to just lose our shit collectively? What I feel that a lot of us forget, and I'm going to use my example of how I recovered from watching 45 minutes of BBC News here. What a lot of us forget is that we are empowered to control our narrative. You know, we are the arbiters of our own perspective, and we have to take control of this. There is a certain agency that we need to exercise, and a certain curation I feel that we need to exercise around what we consume. I've said this before, quote from George Carlin, garbage in, garbage out, right? What we consume, both intellectually and physically, determines the state of our body and our mind. So for me, it's about choosing what I consume, both intellectually and physically. And it's about curating my own perspective. It's about having agency around what I choose to believe, what values I hold, to become unerring, unwavering, and disciplined in the values that I have, and allowing my values to define my meaning, not to come from an external source. There's the psychologist Carl Rogers who talks about the actual and the ideal self, and the actual self is the person that we believe we are in the present, and the ideal self is the person that we believe that we should be. Now, the ideal self is a gestalt of primarily external influences, and that will come from our parents, our teachers, our friends, our co-workers, our working environments, the culture within which we live. These all play a huge factor in defining who we believe that we should be. The bigger the difference between the actual and the ideal self, that's called cognitive dissonance, right? It causes a massive disruption in the internal narrative. So what we need to do is bring the actual and the ideal self closer together. And we do that by self-acceptance and self-compassion. Yeah, talking about compassion again. And being the arbiter of our own values. Recognizing through the power of self-reflection those things which are external and don't belong to us, and through which we're trying to define our authenticity from things that don't come from us anyway. So how can they be authentic? And we need to understand what it is that is important to us and that gives us meaning. We have to look for meaning internally and not externally. And that's what I try to do. And that's it from me today. I hope, as always, that there have been some snippets and insights that you can garner from this, and that you can go into the weekend resonating at a slightly higher frequency with a slightly lower vibration of anxiety, a little less fear, a little more authenticity, and a slightly better understanding of yourself. Take care, and you can tune in to my dulcet tones next Friday, where I shall talk about something else as of yet undecided. Much love.
You've been listening to The Observing Eye. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I hope that you found it useful. And if you're interested in any more of my writings or work around psychology and philosophy and general day-to-day living, please go and take a look at my Substack, which is theobservingeye.substack.com, and that's I as in the letter, not I as in the gelatinous organ through which you see. Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll see you soon.